The Council of Tirisfal, 2,680 years before the Dark Portal. The growth and prosperity experienced by Arathor was due in large part to Magi and the protection they offered settlers. Even so, private distrust of sorceresses festered among the general populace. Over time, dissent and superstition grew, igniting tensions between magic users and the rest of society. Most Magi withdrew from cities and towns, angry at being subjected to what they saw as baseless paranoia. Dalaran's ruler, Ardogan, invited many of these disgruntled Magi to his city. There, he proclaimed, they could live free of prejudice. Many of these Magi answered Ardogan's call and settled in Dalaran. When the first group of these sorceresses arrived, they decided to remake the city into a glorious center of knowledge. Using their great powers, the Magi expanded Dalaran in size and scope. They raised gleaming spires throughout the city and constructed vast libraries and repositories of arcane wonders. Ardogan and the most powerful of these newly arrived Magi formed a magocracy to govern the burgeoning city. This ruling body encouraged the study and practice of arcane arts. As word of Dalaran spread, Magi from across Arathor began to see it as a symbol of hope and freedom. Within a few years, Dalaran exploded in population. Though only a small percentage of the residents could wield the arcane, the protection they offered allowed trade and industry to grow unimpeded. Crime was virtually non-existent. The dangers of the wild were largely forgotten. But this unchecked spellcasting had disastrous consequences. The reckless use of magic began tearing through the fabric of reality in the region. Dalaran's Magi were unaware that the waves of arcane energy billowed out from the city and into the twisting nether. These tides of power drew the attention of the scattered demons belonging to the Burning Legion. A small number of these demons slipped into the physical world, infiltrating Dalaran itself. Though these creatures were weak and usually alone, they succeeded in sowing chaos and terrorizing the peaceful city. The magocracy struggled to deal with these demonic intrusions while also keeping them a secret from the public. More and more, the city's rulers feared that if the superstitious populace learned the truth, they would panic and riot. Eventually, the magocracy sought help from beyond the city's walls. The ruling Magi sent an urgent request to the High Elves of Eldre'Thalas. The humans hoped that the elves, in their infinite wisdom, might understand how to deal with the sudden influx of demons. The ruling body of Eldre'Thalas, the Council of Silvermoon, immediately dispatched the High Elves' greatest Magi to investigate. They determined that only a few demons had crossed into the physical world, but the Magi knew that this was merely the beginning. The problem would grow worse unless the magocracy placed limits on humans' use of magic. Many of Dalaran's leaders rejected the High Elves' recommendations. Magi had come to this city because they could freely practice their arcane arts. Restricting them would result in a number of detrimental effects. At best, most of the brightest Magi would leave and continue their arcane studies elsewhere. At worst, Dalaran's entire economy would collapse, sparking a revolt and scattering the Magi to the far corners of the land. One way or another, the use of arcane magic would continue, be it within Dalaran's walls or without. No matter what happened, the threat posed by the Burning Legion would always exist. Having agreed that they could not prohibit the use of magic, the Council of Silvermoon and the magocracy of Dalaran decided on another solution. Together, they formed a clandestine order to deal with the demonic invaders. This new group met within a secret grove in Tirisfal Glades to discuss its work, and it became known as the Council of Tirisfal. The Order's gifted members would be responsible for tracking and banishing the Legion's agents wherever they might be found across the land. The Magi would also quietly educate other Magi about the dangers of reckless spellweaving. The first Guardian, 2,610 years before the Dark Portal. For decades, the first members of the Council of Tirisfal discreetly tracked down and banished any demons they could find. When facing extraordinarily powerful foes, the Council's members would channel their abilities into a single individual who would act as a solitary vessel of their power for a short time. Empowering a single champion was a dangerous ritual. As such, it was only done in rare and dire circumstances. The council members would have to be in close proximity to perform the ritual, leaving them vulnerable. The massive influx of energies also had the potential to destroy the appointed champions. Yet, if they survived, they could overwhelm even the Burning Legion's mightiest agents. Despite the risk, the Council of Tirisfal used this empowering technique to great effect for many years. But everything changed when a dreadlord named Cathra Natir infiltrated Dalaran. This cunning demon stalked the city's beautiful spires, spreading his poison through the hearts and minds of the populace. Terrible plagues gripped Dalaran. As the affliction spread, a veil of paranoia enveloped the city. Upon investigating these phenomena, the Council of Tirisfal discovered and confronted Cathra Natir. The gifted magi found themselves outmatched by the demon. Seeing no other recourse, they moved to empower a high elf named Ertin Brighthand as their champion. Ertin hurled himself against Cathra Natir, wielding the council's combined might at his own. It was here that Cathra Natir turned the council's greatest strength to his own advantage. Rather than face the champion directly, the demon struck out at the Order's members. With their energies in Brighthand's control, they could not defend themselves. Cathra Natir's shadowy assault disrupted the connection between the council members and Ertin. This in turn weakened the champion's powers, until eventually he fell to the demon. Only the desperate intervention of a young half-elf named Alodai spared the council from total annihilation. The wary council rallied for another battle, but this time as individual magi with no champion to focus their strength. Cathra Natir reveled in the council's disarray, easily thwarting his adversaries. The defeat shattered the Council of Tirisfal's confidence and hope. The magi knew they could not overcome Cathra Natir as individuals, nor could they rely on their empowerment ritual. In this dark moment, Alodai and his allies discovered a new way to wield their power. No longer would the council members need to be present for the battle. Through a complex ritual, they could permanently grant someone a portion of their power. Alodai was the first to undergo this experimental technique. When the ritual proved successful, he declared himself not the council's champion, but its guardian. The newly empowered Alodai faced and struck down Cathra Natir, banishing the dreadlord back to the roaring depths of the twisting nether. Hailed as a hero, Alodai would serve as the first guardian of Tirisfal. He used his great powers to prolong his life, and for 100 years he hunted down the Legion's minions. At the end of his century of service, Alodai gave up his power voluntarily, choosing to live out the remaining of his days in peace and tranquility. So began the tradition of the Guardian. Every century, a new mage would arise to dedicate his or her life to safeguard Azeroth. The magi chosen to wield the council's might would demonstrate their humility and commitment to peace by giving up their tremendous power after 100 years. For more than a millennium, an unprecedented era of prosperity reigned across the whole of Azeroth. Though conflict and suffering could not be entirely eradicated, the Guardians ensured that no demonic intruders would harm the world. As these noble individuals waged their lonely secret war against the Legion, Dalaran continued to serve as one of the world's foremost centers of arcane knowledge and research. Ironforge and the Awakening of the Dwarves, 2,500 years before the Dark Portal. Far to the south of Dalaran, the ancient vault of Uldaman lay darkened and silent. Ages ago, Aranaya and Keeper Arcadas had gone into hibernation. Many of the mechagnomes who had once watched over Uldaman's machineries had departed as well after being afflicted by the curse of flesh. But a handful of these faithful clockwork servants had remained. Their once resilient forms gradually succumbed to the degradation of time. They broke down and died out until only one was left. Although this lone mechagnome did her best to maintain Uldaman, much of the stronghold fell into disrepair. Soon, the curse of flesh began to chip away at her metallic form. The affliction eventually transformed her into a gnome, and she grew old and close to death. Aware that she did not have much time left, the gnome worked to free the earthen hibernation deep within Uldaman. She could not bear the thought that when she passed, they would be abandoned forever in the vault's dead-end halls. With her dying breath, the gnome activated the earthen hibernation chambers. The chambers stirred to life. The Titan forge slumbering within awoke to a new world and a new destiny. These awakened earthen discovered that they had changed dramatically. The curse of flesh had taken its toll, transforming them into creatures of flesh and blood, creatures who would call themselves dwarves. Still groggy from their years of slumber, the dwarves stumbled from the broken halls of Uldaman and emerged onto the surface of the world. They found themselves drawn to the west, where a range of majestic stone mountains towered into the clouds. Much like the gnomes who had left Uldaman centuries ago, the dwarves were forced to contend with the savage beasts that prowled the land. Yet, whereas the gnomes had used their ingenuity to overcome these threats, the dwarves relied on their resilience and natural physical strength. Eventually, they reached the mountain they had seen in the western horizon, and they settled in the snowy region of Dunmorrow. Although the curse of flesh had diminished their memories, the dwarves still had faint ties to their Titan-forged heritage. Inspired by these recollections of the past, they named their new home Kas Modan, or Mountain of Kas, in honor of the Titan shaper Kas Goroth. The dwarves retained a natural affinity to stoneworking and mining as well. They delved into the heart of Kas Modan, tallest mountain, and crafted an immense forge. Around it, the dwarves built a proud city called Ironforge. This would become a seat of the new home, a great and mighty nation that would stretch deep under the mountains. As the dwarves set out to mine Kas Modan's mountains and expand their holdings, they discovered the gnomes dwelling in the nearby caverns. The people of Ironforge were enthralled by the ingenuity and techno-savvy of their diminutive neighbors. The dwarves also sensed a natural kinship with the gnomes, due in large part to their shared Titan-forged ancestry. The dwarves imparted their knowledge of stoneworking and construction to the gnomes, helping them lay the foundations of a wondrous city that would later be called Gnomergan. In turn, the gnomes taught the dwarves engineering and science, introducing much-needed efficiency and advancements to Ironforge. Although the gnomes and dwarves would largely keep to themselves in the centuries that followed, they had formed an unbreakable bond and would aid each other in times of need. The Gurubashi Civil War, 1,500 years before the Dark Portal. In the southern reaches of the Eastern Kingdoms, the Gurubashi jungle trolls languished in poverty and hardship. They had never fully recovered from the destruction wrought by the Sundering. Many hunting and farming grounds were forever lost, and famine was a constant companion for the Empire. Desperate to reclaim their former glory, the Gurubashi of Stranglethorn Vale eventually turned to the powerful Loa spirits whom the trolls worshipped. One such creature answered their call, Hakar the Soul Flayer, the Loa of Blood. The malevolent spirit promised to help the Gurubashi extend their empire across the lower half of the Eastern Kingdoms. In return, he demanded large numbers of living sacrifices. The Gurubashi who pledged their loyalties to Hakar became known as the Hakari, They soundly defeated nearby packs of gnolls and tribes of murlocs, as well as other trolls who opposed Hakkar. Those taken prisoners soon wished they had died in battle. Hakkar's disembodied spirit gorged in the blood of the captives for years. Under the Hakkari's control, the Gurubashi had achieved all they had hoped, conquering vast swaths of land and even many of the islands that dotted the coast of the South Seas. The Zandalari, observing these events from afar, were pleased at first with the Gurubashi's return to conquest and traditional worship. Yet, once it became clear that the Hakkar's bloodlust would never be sated, they knew that the fiendish god would drive not only the trolls' race to destruction, but the entire world. The Zandalari rallied their forces to set sail for the Eastern Kingdoms. There, they met with Gurubashi trolls who had kept their descent hidden from the Hakkari. The Zandalari and their new allies learned that the faction of Hakkar's most zealous priest, the Atal-ai, were attempting to summon the Loa spirit into a living form. This in turn would awaken terrible new dimensions of his power and spell certain doom for the troll race. Horrified by the Atal-ai's plans, the Zandalari host stormed the Gurubashi capital of Sul-Gurub. Battles raged among the vine-covered ziggurats of the temple city day and night. Finally, atop Hakkar's blood-stained shrine, the Zandalari defeated Hakkar and most of his crazed followers. Despite this victory, the Zandalari and their allies agreed to remain vigilant for any sign of Hakkar's reappearance. The Loa was not truly dead. His spirit had merely been banished from the physical world. A number of his fanatical Atal-ai priests had also escaped into the jungle surrounding Sul-Gurub. These trolls finally settled in the Swamp of Sorrow, north of the Gurubashi capital. In the heart of the wild marshland, they secretly constructed a temple to their bloodthirsty Loa, the Temple of Atal-Hakkar. Deep within the temple, the Atal-ai continued their worship of Hakkar. They practiced grisly rituals and ceremonies, hoping to once again summon the Loa into the physical world. Dark magic twisted the flora and fauna surrounding the temple. This in turn drew the attention of the green dragon aspect, Ysera. Upon learning of the Atal-ai's plans to summon Hakkar, Ysera unleashed her powers into the temple of its inhabitants. The dragon aspect's attack buckled the temple's walls and blasted its foundations apart. The immense ziggurat began sinking beneath the land. As the swampy mire engulfed the temple, the terrified Atal-ai abandoned their rituals and scattered into the marshlands. Though Ysera had thwarted Hakkar's return, she knew that the Atal-ai might someday attempt to summon the Loa again. Thus, she commanded a number of her loyal green dragons to watch over the ruined temple and ensure it would never again be used to bring such evil into the world. Eldre'Thalas and the Binding of Imbolthad, 1,200 years before the Dark Portal. Far across the sea from the Gurubashi Empire, a secretive society of highborn who had survived the Great Sundering grappled with an uncertain future. They were known as the Shendralar, meaning those who have remained hidden. Nearly 10,000 years before, Queen Ajara had charged them with the storage and safekeeping of her most precious tombs. Led by Prince Thortheldrin, the Shendralar dutifully obeyed their queen. They journeyed into the misty heart of Kalimdor's southern jungles and established a grand city called Eldre'Thalas. When the Great Sundering later decimated the world, Eldre'Thalas narrowly escaped destruction. Only the efforts of Thortheldrin and his followers spared the city. Together, they wove a great spell to shield Eldre'Thalas from the destructive forces of the Sundering. Although they had saved their city, the Shendralar soon discovered that the Well of Eternity had been consumed in the Sundering. Without the fount of power to draw on, Thortheldrin and his followers saw their immortality greatly diminished. The Shendralar soon fell into a deep lethargy and languished in their isolated sanctuary. Thorthelrin eventually formulated a plan to revitalize the Chandrilar. He forged pylons into the damaged wings of Eldre'Thalas, constructing a prison to house a new source of power, a demon named Imulthar. To the shock of the other Chandrilar, Thorthelrin had covertly summoned and bound the terrifying creature to siphon the demon's power and to give it to his followers. Any objections were quickly settled once the Chandrilars experienced the demon's energy for themselves. Though dark and volatile, Imulthar's power was invigorating and addictive, more so than the Well of Eternity had been. The Chandrilar reveled in their newfound source of power, but they knew that the keeping of Imulthar in their midst was dangerous. Thus, they developed a means to use the demon's power to keep him imprisoned. For thousands of years, all seemed well. Yet, the cost of keeping Imulthar restrained required more and more power. Nearly 9,000 years after the Sundering, the demon's prison crossed a dangerous threshold. It began consuming so much energy that the Chandrilar were left with none to siphon for themselves. Almost overnight, Thorthelrin's seemingly ingenious plan unraveled, and his access to the demon's magic was gone. Not only had the Chandrilar lost their immortality once again, but they had also grown hopelessly addicted to Imulthar's potent energies. Desperate to regain his power, Thorthelrin plotted with his closest allies and murdered the other Chandrilar in cold blood. Thorthelrin's treacherous plan worked. Having thinned the population, the remaining elves could draw on Imulthar's power indefinitely. With the Chandrilar's numbers diminished, Thorthelrin and his followers abandoned much of their once glorious city. The greater part of Eldre'Thalas fell into darkness and disrepair. Soon, other creatures from the surrounding jungles moved in to stake their claim to the crumbling elven refuge. The fracturing of Arathor, 1,200 years before the Dark Portal. As Thorthelrin and his followers retreated deeper into Eldre'Thalas, the kingdom of Arathor began to split apart. The once small trading outposts and cities that had been established after the Troll Wars had grown into mighty city-states of their own. Eventually, Strom saw its influence over these regions slip away. The island bastion of Tirisfal continued its traditions of trading and shipping. The city-state boasted a massive navy, the greatest in all of Arathor. Its most daring captains explored the coasts of the Eastern Kingdoms, returning with exotic goods and tales of strange land in the remote corners of the continent. Tirisfal's shipping and fishing economy eclipsed the maritime power of its northern neighbor, Gilneas. Unable to compete with Tirisfal's burgeoning navy, Gilneas focused on bolstering its land-based armies and mercantile capabilities. The military of Gilneas became one of the most powerful in Arathor, equaled only by the city-state of Alterac, which held dominion over much of the Northlands. Gilneas and Alterac often combined their forces and led grand expeditions to secure the borders of Arathor. South of Strom, in Cosmodon, they discovered the dwarves and the gnomes. The expeditionary forces marveled at the wondrous feats of construction and engineering that were Ironforge and Gnomergan. The humans became quick friends with both races, especially the dwarves, who also shared their love of battle, storytelling, and strong ale. The three cultures engaged in rigorous trade, exchanging knowledge of smithing, mining, engineering, and even arcane magic. Over the years, Strom's power continued to wane. Bound by rocky, mountainous terrain and lacking natural resources, Strom could not compete with the economies of the other city-states. Eventually, many of Strom's noble families departed from the fertile valleys and pastures of the north. There, they founded a city-state and named it after the surrounding region, Lordaeron. The nobles used their wealth to buy up large plots of land, some of which had been developed by the earlier settlers. These areas included Agamand Mills and the farmsteads owned by the Balnir and the Solidan families. Lordaeron was also home to deeply religious ascetics who believed in the light, a cosmic power they claimed infused every living thing in existence. Many sick and elderly people traveled to religious communes in Lordaeron, hoping to find a cure for their ailments. Others made pilgrimage to the city-state in search of wisdom and enlightenment. Lordaeron's borders quickly expanded, and it matured into a proper kingdom. The noble families eventually renamed the heart of their flourishing nation Capital City. Not long after the Lords of Strom went north, the last living descendants of King Thoradin also left Arathor. Led by a member of Thoradin's line named Faldir, they set off by sea and ventured far to the south, enticed by rumors of lush, unplumbed land where they could make a new beginning. The stories proved true. Thoradin's descendants settled the land and founded the Kingdom of Stormwind. Nestled among cliffs and boasting a natural protecting harbor, this city-state established itself as a major power in the region. Strom was left in the hands of a few ruling families, too stubborn to abandon the old capital. Among them were the descendants of Igneous Trollbane, a general who had become a legend during the Troll Wars. Over the years, these families rebuilt Strom's crumbling infrastructure and renamed their capital Stormguard. The city, however, would never regain its former glory. Indeed, Thoradin's dream of a unified people was dying. Over generations, the various city-states became increasingly distant and insular. Rivalries emerged as these nations turned inward, concerned with their own well-being and less inclined to offer aid to each other. Lordaeron and the Holy Light. After the Troll Wars, a number of human priests began having faint visions and dreams of angelic beings, geometric forms that thrummed with living light. Although they did not know it, the priests had actually communed with the Naru and the great dark beyond. Through this connection, the Naru guided the hearts of some humans and introduced them to the Holy Light. From their tenuous encounters with the Naru, the priests learned to harness the extraordinary healing effects of the light. They also formed a religious movement founded in the tenets of justice, peace, and altruistic works. Popular among common folk, this movement flourished.